Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
These days, we can't go more than 6 weeks or so without another new announcement from a government boasting of a huge investment in electric vehicle manufacturing. And why not? Electric vehicles are crucial to our climate targets, and the automotive sector is a critical part of our economy. So it just makes sense. And if you're a politician dead set on defending the Canadian electric vehicle industry, which you've just put billions into, this might seem like the next logical step.
Canadian auto workers and the auto sector, however, are facing unfair competition from China's intentional, state-directed policy of overcapacity.
That's Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, who is in the middle of a 30-day consultation to determine if Canada will place even more tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Now, why are we so concerned about Chinese EVs? Well, because they're a lot cheaper, and they're getting really good. And increasingly, it seems like China might be making the kind of electric vehicles that Canadians really want to buy. So why is EV adoption in Canada struggling right now? What is China doing that has Canada and the United States, which also raised tariffs on Chinese EVs, so freaked out? What do we actually want out of an electric car, and who's going to make them for us and take our money? I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. This is The Big Story. Lorraine Sommerfeld is a longtime automotive journalist, the author of the Lorraine Explains column at Driving.ca, and the host, naturally, of the Driving podcast. Hey, Lorraine.
How you doing, Jordan?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Always fun.
Why don't you start, for those who have maybe heard something about it but don't know the specifics? What is the Canadian government right now considering doing with electric vehicles from China?
Because we're seeing an overproduction of cars in China, we've seen the U.S. jump their tariffs to 100%, which, effectively trying to kill it. Right now in Canada, there's only a 6% tariff on Chinese vehicles, and the only ones that actually come in are Teslas that are being built over there. And so now what's happening is because we're putting so much tax money and the big three are building so many, electric cars, they're looking at higher tariffs. They want to protect our car industry, basically. But it's not that straightforward. There's a lot of things that, have to be considered.
Why would Canada be so protectionist about electric vehicles in particular? I know this is a government that has also set goals to make every vehicle electric in the not too distant future, right?
Yeah, those are moving goalposts, as every country has found out, basically. They've put in over $50 billion. This is just government money going in to develop our EV pipeline. And the automotive industry is a massive, massive engine in Canada's economy. I mean, we all know that part. And the EVs that have been being made in China are excellent. And they, of course, have no human rights issues. They have nothing. So they are producing them very cheaply, and they're doing it really, really well. And they've also been overproducing. But they've made such inroads in the European market already, the Chinese have. And it's very twisted because a lot of the big three, Stellantis, everybody, they all own and are owned by a lot of Chinese manufacturers. So there's so many tendrils to this that it's really difficult to tease out, one main line.
Well, how is the demand for electric vehicles in Canada trending anyway? I know I've spoken to journalists in the past who have said, we may reach kind of a saturation point. What's it look like when you look at the graph?
The uptake is increasing, and there's soft sales quarters, of course, and the pandemic threw everything on its head. Every electric vehicle you see on the road cost its manufacturer money to sell. Like, nobody's making money at it yet because the numbers aren't there. But what we have to kind of take into account is, you probably noticed over the past couple decades, everything is bigger, bigger, bigger. We invented the SUV, or Ford did, by slapping a cozy cabin onto a F-150.
Right.
And so now we've got people driving their living rooms. The vehicles we drive are so enormous, it's ridiculous. North American manufacturers, they started electrifying these massive vehicles because they said that's what their people wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it makes them so heavy. That electric Hummer weighs 9,000 pounds.
Wow.
Like, can you imagine being hit by that? And so, the F-150, the Lightning, they electrify these massive SUVs and pickup trucks thinking that's what consumers want because they told us that. I got to put my hand up. Manufacturers told us that's what we wanted and sold it to us and marketed it to us. And I watched it happen. I had one of the first Explorers. I'm part of the problem, but I watched it happen. You cannot play chicken and egg with this. They made them. They make more money on them. It's the ones they want to sell. We've seen our small car market evaporate. Go and try and find a little car.
I mean, you're speaking to the proud owner of a Hyundai Accent. So one of the last little ones around.
I have an Elantra, a little hatch.
This may seem like a little bit stereotypical, but when I think of the type of person that really cares deeply about the environment and wants to purchase an electric vehicle because of that, the average giant SUV, Hummer, F-150 owner is not the person I picture. So I wonder how the manufacturers kind of got this misconstrued.
Because those are the vehicles they sell. Like 75% of the market, I could be off by a point or two, is these big vehicles.
Right.
And so they look at it and go, if we want to make people want electrics, we're going to have to give them what we know they're already buying. And when you see, Prius, tell me, the Prius jokes have been writing themselves for 3 decades, but they're brilliant cars. And the Leafs were out there, like they've tried with smaller cars to introduce EVs. And so those people you're talking about who really care are, they want the smaller ones. But again, there's so many things tied onto this. When you read crash reports, and the safest vehicles are those great big ones, and people go, I want to feel safe.
Right.
And they're right. They are safer in those. It's everyone around you that gets killed.
Yeah.
So we're not asking all the right questions all the time.
What other reasons have people been giving for lack of interest, at least relative to a few years back, in purchasing EVs?
Cost. Those are the top 3. The average cost of a new car in Canada right now, I believe, is $70,000, $74,000, which is insane. And EVs, we haven't hit parity yet, so they still cost more. And I think, I just had a rental Mustang E. It's $66,000 for this car. It was lovely. It was great.
Yeah.
But $66,000 for something that's not very much bigger than my little hatch, which cost me $30,000.
Right.
And because of the crazy fluctuations in prices on batteries and components, the makers all thought we'd be at parity by now, and they're not. The closest we can get is Volvo, also owned by a Chinese company now.
So this brings me to the cars that we aren't getting.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the BYD Seagull, and what kind of car is it? How's it different from the conversation we've been having?
It's a small car, great for running around. We used to make fun of Chinese cars. I remember going to my first Detroit auto show, and we're laughing because the doors are coming off in our hands. Some of them were made of cardboard, like paste. But they have gotten so good. And actually, one of GM's former head engineers got his hands on this Seagull here in North America and took it apart and said, this thing's brilliant. It's, it'd only take a couple $1,000s to bring it up to North American standards. That should terrify the crap out of every, the big 3. And it did. Like, it really did, because up till this point, we've been able to kind of go, their standards are crappy. They're not as high as ours. They're getting there. When you put enough money, and they did, the money that China put into this industry is mind-boggling. So they're doing the same thing everyone's doing. They're underwriting the development of this for their people.
So describe the car to me then. How big is it? What does it look like? And how much does it cost? And how far does it go?
I think the range is about 350 kilometers.
How does that compare to the ones we're talking about in Canada?
Well, we're pushing everything. We want everything to have over 500 kilometers because we imagine we use that much.
Yes.
I had one for 4 days and we used 100 kilometers and we were driving around all over the place. So people overestimate. The same way they buy a big vehicle because they picture going to the cottage once a year with grandma and all the kids, but they drive around with it empty, the other 51 weeks of the year.
Yeah.
So we tend to estimate how much we need in a vehicle. It's basically something like what you and I drive. It's a small vehicle that's cute, and it gets range, and it's got the stuff you need in it, and they're selling them for like around $10,000. I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I just got out of a $66,000 EV, and this one's 10, and they're saying, well, put on the standards here, we can get it to 12 or 13 US. That's why Biden just quadrupled the tariffs. I mean, Trump had it at 25%, he jacked it to 100, because his whole program of subsidizing EV adoption, they are spending billions and billions of dollars. And we have it here too. Actually, BC just announced they're going to cut their provincial one. But up to now, it's been really successful. So there are federal ones, and then Quebec, and I believe Nova Scotia has something. And BC, well, not exactly sure how that's going to pan out, but Ontario yanked ours as soon as Ford got into office. He said, we're not doing a provincial version. That's how other countries have gotten, they've picked up the adoption more than Canada has.
If the large SUV and truck electric vehicles are not selling here because people don't want them and they're crazy expensive, why don't we have smaller EVs like the Seagull in North America? And are they eventually coming? Like, you got to figure at some point these manufacturers learn their lesson and make the cars people want to drive.
I think the saddest thing was Chevy did the Bolt and the Volt, a hybrid and an electric, and they were brilliant and they were affordable. And they killed them both, and they shouldn't have. And I'm telling them now, bring those back, because the people that have them absolutely love them. But we've been so focused and kind of head up our butt about what's happening with the climate. We only believe it when we see it happen. It's the wet paint thing and the hot stove. And now all of a sudden, people are looking at the size of our vehicles. But even a couple of years ago, you walk into a showroom and they go, this one's bigger. And you go, oh, look at that. I can have that for only an extra $100 a month. And we buy cars by the month. We do not buy them by the whole price. We are idiot consumers. Totally stupid. As soon as you walk in, they go, how much do you have a month to spend? Don't tell them.
Right. So how is this going to change then, if that's what they want to continue to make? Like, how do either these Chinese cars get here or our vehicle makers adapt and create the kind of EVs that people can afford? Because we're never going to hit full adoption with what's on the market now, right?
No, it's going to have to be more stick and less carrot. I think we need to get the prices on par. We need to decide what we're doing with these batteries when they're past their life or post-car life. I want more answers on it being a closed loop for recycling these precious metals that are in some really dangerous places and cost a lot of money. I read a stat out of the States that 1 in 5 charging stations has been vandalized or doesn't work. That's not good enough. People are used to pulling up, gassing up, and leaving. So we need the infrastructure to be built, to be expanded, to be maintained. And we have to keep addressing problems that are now, people are stealing the copper wiring out of them because they're desperate. So again, I wish there was a linear answer to everything. There's not. Both governments, you can put tariffs and stuff on, but we're bound to trade agreements with China, and that might be violating those. So they're going to have to tread very carefully. And I don't want to see our country flooded with cheap Chinese vehicles. But on the other hand, like you said, we have to answer what consumers need and either start building them again, the small ones, and consumers are going to have to wrap their head around the fact they don't have to drive their living room to work every day. So we're going to have to see some really, really big changes on all sides of the equation. Manufacturers, consumers, and the way they're advertised and sent to us. But the China thing is pushing everybody fast, just like Tesla pushed the EV industry. China is now pushing it even harder.
So why can't I get a Seagull here? And will that change specifically?
Not yet, but they're setting up shop in Mexico. China is smart, and they know that like every car manufacturer has places in Mexico, and you're driving a car that's got components made there, if not the whole car. And so China is setting up a shop in Mexico. So I'm asking anyone, does that violate their thing? If they're being built in Mexico, they're doing what everybody else is doing. So that's going to be another question. If they're not coming in from China, but they're coming in from Mexico, which is part of the 3-country agreement on vehicles.
Right.
So it's a tricky scenario, and they're all being nervous, and they're trying to go after a rights commission to say that China has flooded the market. They've overproduced on purpose to try and take over Europe, but they have 230 dealerships in 19 countries for BYD, which is their biggest EV producer. Everyone's been playing checkers, I swear, while China's been playing chess.
You have been on the car beat for a while. I wanted to ask you, If you've ever imagined this beat becoming so political. I mean, we're discussing geopolitics here. We've also been discussing, morals and values in terms of people's approach to EVs and people's views on things like Tesla. It hasn't always been like this, right? Where do you see it going?
No. I think it's a really sad statement on how we have polarized ourselves. But the politicization of EVs has been screamingly funny, but really dangerous. And a lot of it, it's Musk. Musk didn't invent the EV. He bought the company. And then he turned into what he always was, which was a raving idiot. But okay. Now, people that have Teslas, some of them have bumper stickers that say, I bought it before I knew he was nuts.
Right.
I don't blame them. I think it's funny. And those stickers are going to sell. But to politicize major industries in this country this way, I shouldn't be surprised because look at oil and the oil lobbyists. They've wrecked everything, and they've been given gobs of money to do it with. So, I mean, we're kind of stupid. We're loading the weapon, paying for the weapon, and putting it in our enemy's hands. And we seem to be okay with that. I brought up Prius earlier. Tree huggers. Remember all the jokes we made about Prius owners?
Yep.
Yeah, Ed Begley Jr. was the first one. And, I'm old. I remember this stuff. But why? They're fabulous cars. All of Vancouver's cabs went to be Priuses, and they put 400,000 or 500,000 kilometers on them.
Wow.
With hybrid emissions, which are super low because Vancouver doesn't move. The traffic just sits there. But, I mean, they're brilliant vehicles, and Toyota's perfected that. So that's why we're seeing a rise of hybrids instead of EVs.
Right.
Because people they're not sure who to trust. And this is like betting on both sides.
Let me ask you this lastly then. I'm assuming that you'll be watching for Canada to announce higher tariffs at the end of this consultation period. What else are you looking for from the industry over the summer and fall?
I think they've got to get their messaging together on kind of understanding what consumers want and how they're going to deliver that to them. And consumers have been saying repeatedly, we care about the environment, absolutely. But we also want something that meets our needs, and we have to be able to afford it. We've got people that are opting out of getting their licenses now. They're just not bothering because owning a car costs so much. And to try and guilt them into going into an EV that costs $20,000 more is not the way to go. And we're looking at battery advancement. It's just every few months there's new breakthroughs. Like, it's phenomenal. So it will get there. And I would tell consumers it will get there, but don't feel guilty if you're not there yet because it's a lot of money and most of us, frankly, don't have it.
Lorraine, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks, Jordan.
Lorraine Sommerfeld, author of Lorraine Explains at Driving.ca and the host of the Driving Podcast, which you can find wherever you get podcasts. That is, incidentally, the same place you can find The Big Story, or, of course, you can find it at thebigstorypodcast.ca. You can send us any feedback you have on this episode, and I know some of you have, some you do every time we talk about electric vehicles. The way to give it to us is email hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or call us at 416-935-5935 and leave a voicemail. I already told you that The Big Story is in every single podcast player, but now I will add that it's on every single smart speaker. All you got to do is ask it to play The Big Story podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. We'll talk tomorrow.